is an AB stereo Atmos taken in the black and forest.
And then there are films that ask to be understood. This one begins not with spectacle, but with the invisible tremor of an idea powerful enough to alter physics, politics, and the moral economy of the human mind. When Christopher Nolan embarked on this project, he wasn't just adapting a biography. He was re-engineering cinema itself into a reactor where science, conscience, and capital collide. The production, financed at roughly $100 million, carried not merely the burden of nuclear history, but the volatile arithmetic of a modern studio gamble. A 3-hour R-rated, dialogue-dense epic sold to audiences trained by algorithms to crave brevity. Yet that very contradiction became its market hook, a prestige product position as intellectual spectacle. The studio's investment was effectively a long-term bond in the currency of trust. Nolan, a director whose previous films had delivered consistent 9-figure returns, represented a kind of cinematic blue chip. Universal's decision to fund this after Nolan's public exit from Warner Brothers was itself a geopolitical gesture within Hollywood's corporate landscape, a reminder that talent equity can outbid platform loyalty. By greenlighting a period drama shot largely on IMAX 65mm film stock, the studio wasn't chasing nostalgia. It was leveraging scarcity. Only a handful of theaters in the world could exhibit the film in its intended format, transforming limited supply into premium ticket demand. That strategic scarcity converted aesthetic purity into economic advantage, a masterclass in how artistic obsession becomes marketing strategy. From its first frames, the story situates us inside the nervous system of ambition. The camera doesn't introduce Robert Oppenheimer as a man, but as a phenomenon, energy contained within intellect contained within responsibility. The narrative unfolds like a startup pitch to destiny, a young theoretical physicist assembling the ultimate research team, securing government backing, and racing competitors in an arm's-length technological sprint whose outcome would define the century's moral ledger. Every conversation feels like venture capital in verbal form, persuasion traded for resources, ideas converted into power. This fusion of art and engineering was mirrored on set. Nolan's refusal to use CGI for the Trinity explosion turned the shoot into a physics experiment in miniature. Instead of outsourcing one to computers, he and cinematographer Hoyte van Hoytema constructed real explosions with layered chemical reactions, captured through high-speed film that translated combustion into light poetry. The result wasn't just visual authenticity. It was brand differentiation. In a market saturated with digital sameness, tactile spectacle signaled credibility, an analog luxury product in a streaming economy. Beneath the spectacle, however, runs the quiet current of economic tension. Biopics rarely yield blockbuster margins, yet this project was engineered to defy genre economics. Its release alongside a pastel-colored pop phenomenon created a cultural event the internet nicknamed Barbenheimer, accidental synergy that doubled as organic co-marketing. One side of the box office coin was escapist consumer fantasy, the other existential inquiry. Together they produced a demographic overlap few algorithms could have predicted, translating discourse into dollars. The opening weekend's $80 million domestic haul was not merely ticket sales. It was proof of concept that intellectual cinema could still scale globally when packaged as communal spectacle. What distinguishes this film's industrial footprint is how it redefines return on investment. The financial ROI, nearly tenfold on budget, is impressive, but the psychological ROI is incalculable. It invited audiences to participate in ethical introspection, to measure themselves against history's most dangerous intelligence experiment. That moral engagement became a form of brand loyalty. People didn't just watch the film. They discussed it, taught it, argued about it. In marketing terms, Nolan converted attention into retention into evangelism. Technologically, the productions serve as a live case study in analog-digital hybrid workflows. Shooting large-format film required precision logistics, miles of IMAX negative, custom-built film magazines, and post-production color timing in DaVinci resolve calibrated for unprecedented dynamic range. Each technical constraint generated creative discipline, proving that innovation often flourishes under limitation. The workflow's complexity mirrored the Manhattan Project's own hierarchy of knowledge silos, compartmentalized experts contributing to an outcome no single individual could fully foresee. Yet the heart of the film, and of this analysis, lies in its moral accounting. The father of the atomic bomb becomes the CEO of consequence, a leader discovering that success can destroy its creator's equilibrium. His brilliance attracts investors, generals, politicians, fellow scientists, but the same brilliance bankrupts his peace of mind. In behavioral economic terms, he suffers from the paradox of rational utility, maximizing output at the cost of inner sustainability. That's the psychological balance sheet Nolan wants us to read. Not who built the bomb, but who could live with having built it. The studio, in turn, markets that guilt as spectacle. Trailers emphasize both explosion and introspection, cutting between cosmic fire and trembling silence. It's a pitch to two audiences simultaneously, those who crave visual enormity and those who crave philosophical intimacy. The campaign's genius was its refusal to simplify, positioning complexity itself as entertainment. Advertisers in finance, tech, and education saw alignment. The film spoke their language of innovation, risk, and accountability. CPMs followed accordingly, as brands sought adjacency to prestige content that signaled intelligence rather than impulse. As the narrative's early act unfold, Oppenheimer's academic ascent, his encounters with mentors and ideological temptations, Nolan structures time like capital flow. Each scene invests in future payoff. Each dialogue line accrues thematic interest. The editing rhythm, executed by Jennifer Lame, mimics accelerated cognition, multiple timelines collapsing into a single, relentless thought process. That structure isn't just storytelling bravado, it's economic design. Attention is a modern viewer's currency, and Nolan treats it like scarce resource, compounded through curiosity rather than exposition. Ultimately, the first acquisitions of film is both art and audit, a cinematic ledger balancing invention against consequence, genius against guilt, revenue against risk. By the time the narrative begins its march toward Los Alamos, the viewer is no longer a passive spectator, but an investor of emotion, time, and conscience. That, literature-loving friends, is the real opening transaction of this masterpiece, a fusion reaction between imagination and accountability that lights the dark theater with something rarer than spectacle: intellectual trust. The first half unfolds like a venture pitch that keeps changing investors. We watch the young scientist wander through Europe's intellectual stock exchanges, Göttingen, Cambridge, Zurich, each laboratory a different future's market for ideas. Every conversation with physicists feels like a transaction of equations, a handshake over invisible commodities, atoms, probabilities, paradoxes. The film turns academic discovery into entrepreneurial acceleration, portraying thought as capital seeking its most volatile yield. Nolan structures this early timeline with the pacing discipline of a product prototype phase. Every scene is an R&D cycle, hypothesis, experiment, revision, with Oppenheimer as both inventor and test subject. The editing alternates between his internal hallucinations of particles colliding and his outward performance of calm precision. That rhythm captures the startup founder's dilemma. Innovation demands madness, but funding demands composure. The director visualizes this balance through micro flashes of color and light, moments where scientific curiosity burns hotter than morality can contain. Recruitment becomes the film's first economic metaphor. As Oppenheimer returns to America, he gathers minds the way a CEO gathers seed stage partners. Feynman, Teller, Bohr, and countless others appear as high-value assets on the intellectual cap table. His charisma becomes his pitch deck. He sells not comfort but urgency, persuading men to wager conscience for discovery. In behavioral terms, he offers them utility and legacy, not in safety. The screenplay translates that moral risk into financial language without ever using numbers. The value of their work is implied in the scale of its secrecy. Cinematically, Hoyte van Hoytema lenses these early assemblies with liquidity that mimics capital flow. The camera glides through corridors, round-table meetings, lecture halls, always moving, never static, like money in motion. Color temperature shifts subtly between the cool rationality of theory and the warm volatility of ambition. Each cut invests in the next emotional return, sustaining tension not through conflict but through expectation of discovery. The The moment the government enters a narrative, the tone pivots from startup to acquisition. General Leslie Groves arrives like a venture capitalist with infinite funding and limited patience. His conversations with Oppenheimer are negotiations of governance. Who owns the technology? Who manages the scientists? Who carries liability when genius detonates? The Los Alamos project begins not as a laboratory, but as a merger between military bureaucracy and creative anarchy. Nolan frames their relationship with managerial realism. Groves demanding measurable milestones, Oppenheimer arguing for theoretical freedom. Their dialogue, half banner and half audit meeting, embodies the film's fascination with structured chaos. As construction of the desert city begins, the screenplay turns logistical detail into emotional architecture. Trucks arrive, barracks rise, blueprints multiply. The desert becomes a spreadsheet filling itself with human data. Every hammer strike sounds like the tick of a fiscal clock. Time is the enemy. The competitor race with Germany an ever-shrinking burn rate. The editing tempo accelerates, cross-cutting between scientific design and political decision, revealing how bureaucracy can become both investor and saboteur. Within this first half lies the film's sharpest lesson on emotional investment. Oppenheimer's growing detachment from personal relationships mirrors the liquidity crisis of any over-leveraged enterprise. Kitty's loneliness, Gene Tatlock's despair, and the uneasy camaraderie among the physicists all register as depreciation on the emotional balance sheet. The narrative quantifies empathy without digits. Every argument or silence feels like unpaid interest accruing in the background. Midway, Nolan folds a timeline, introducing the black and white sequences that function as audit reports of the future. Here we glimpse the inquiry rooms, the hearings, the committees that will later dismantle the myth they are still constructing. It's the cinematic equivalent of discounted cash flow projection, the story acknowledging its eventual reckoning even as it spends recklessly in the present. This structural recursion turns exposition into foresight, allowing tension to compound. Thematically, the first half also models how innovation ecosystems evolve. Early creativity thrives on open exchange, later progressed demands secrecy. What began as collaborative academia morphs into compartmentalized militarism. Each scientist loses peripheral vision, working on fragments of a device whose total meaning is hidden, a metaphor for modern specialization, where efficiency increases as comprehension decreases. The viewer experiences that blindness too, seeing brilliance reduced to deliverables. Technically, the production renders a shift through texture. The color segments pulse with grain, giving images tactile imperfection. The monochrome ones gleam with clinical precision. That contrast functions like accounting duality, debit and credit, moral light, and operational shadow. Ludwig Göransson's score underscores it with motifs that oscillate between swelling optimism and percussive anxiety, a soundscape of profit and cost. When the Los Alamos community finally stabilizes, we witness a conversion of theory into manufacturing. Machines arrive, prototypes explode, data accumulates. The camera's movement tightens, angles become more vertical, suggesting both ambition and confinement. The atmosphere thickens with project management tension, deadlines, resource allocation, interdepartmental friction. Even the dialogue begins to resemble corporate memos, precise coded, stripped of emotion. The lab becomes a factory of control risk, producing not bombs but milestones. Yet beneath that managerial rhythm, Nolan keeps inserting visual reminders of conscience. Faces lit by flame, sand swirling like fallout, brief hallucinations of atomic light. These intrusions act as ethical expense lines interrupting profit statements. Each vision hints that the emotional debt will someday mature. By treating dread as recurring expenditure, the film grounds grandeur and accountability. As the first half closes, the audience senses the pivot from creation to consequence. Oppenheimer stands before a desert sunrise, watching the city he built hum with energy, unaware that every hum carries the frequency of future guilt. The project is operational. The investors are satisfied. Milestones are met. But the viewer perceives that success has already begun to decay, interest accumulating on an unpayable loan of morality. In business terms, the startup has entered its scale-up phase, expanding output without recalculating ethics. In cinematic terms, we are halfway through a story whose true explosion will be psychological. The first half, then, is not about atoms colliding. It is about principles compounding. It charts a conversion of curiosity into obligation, of funding into fate. By the midpoint, the return on investment appears infinite, until we remember that every reaction, financial or nuclear, releases heat that must eventually cool. The second half opens with pressure, Not cinematic suspense alone, but the structural compression of capital, ethics, and time. The desert is now a factory floor, and Oppenheimer is reluctant CEO. Each dawn brings new test data. Each dusk another audit of failure. What began as scientific discovery now operates as production cycle. Nolan's pacing mirrors quarterly reports. Build, measure, pivot. You feel the tension of an enterprise about to go public on the open market of history. From the moment the Trinity test nears completion, every frame behaves like a countdown on a financial dashboard. Teams report figures, calibrations, yield percentages. Even silence becomes measurable. The camera tracks movement with the precision of a cost accountant. Men walking between bunkers, instruments humming, checklists muttered under breath. It's not drama for its own sake. It's operational reporting. The film's brilliance lies in transforming logistical minutiae into existential theater. Then comes that early morning calm, the pre-launch stillness of an industry ready to ship its first prototype. There is no music, only wind. Oppenheimer's face, lit by faint lightning on the horizon, carries the weighted serenity of a founder about to press deploy. When the blast finally arrives, it is both dividend and debt. The orange sphere rises in perfect slow motion, the sound delayed, a fiscal explosion suspended in sensory credit. For 10 seconds, the audience experiences profit without guilt. Then the shockwave hits, and the silence returns like an invoice. Nolan designs this moment not as spectacle, but as audit entry. The Trinity sequence is the line where innovation crosses into liability. It delivers the emotional yield promised since Act 1, but instantly devalues everything that follows. Oppenheimer's expression afterward, that slight tremor of all curdled into horror, is the ledger closing. In financial analogy, he has achieved liquidity but lost solvency of conscience. After the test, narrative tempo fractures. Scenes jump between political meetings, family confrontations, and newsreels announcing Japan's destruction. The editing's disorientation mimics market volatility, jubilation followed by crash. Groves reports success metrics, Washington applauds. Newspapers print victory returns. Yet inside the Los Alamos cafeteria, Oppenheimer speaks to cheering workers and imagines their skin peeling under invisible light. Nolan overlays his hallucination with patriotic noise, turning celebration into psychological short-selling. The scene visualizes a collapse of moral stock value at the very peak of external valuation. The rest of the film becomes liquidation. One by one, relationships, reputations, and illusions are sold off to pay for that moment of transcendence. The government reclaims control, scientists disperse, and Oppenheimer enters political hearings that function like bankruptcy court for soul. The cross-examinations are shot in tight monochrome, the aesthetic of documentary evidence. Dialogue sharpens into legalese, every word an attempt to assign ownership of blame. We watch him face Louis Strauss, a bureaucrat weaponizing jealousy as regulation. In management language, it's a hostile takeover of legacy. The courtroom sections illustrate how innovation cycles invert. The very structure that rewarded boldness now punishes ambiguity. Nolan uses intercut timelines as an information economy. Memories traded, reputations leveraged, truth inflated. The black and white timeline represents institutional auditing. The color timeline, personal recollection. The alternation between them functions like double-entry bookkeeping. Every claim mirrored by contradiction. Through this formal device, the film performs its own accounting, reconciling myth against documentation. Amid hearings and betrayals, the script keeps its macroeconomic awareness alive. Funding dries up, public opinion shifts, and the hero discovers that intellectual capital without political liquidity is worthless. Colleagues distance themselves. The government that once financed him now amortizes his achievements for propaganda. In behavioral economics terms, he has lost social credit. His prior gains become sunk cost, his moral clarity an untradeable asset. Technically, the cinematography in the stretch abandons grandeur for compression. IMAX frames that once captured desert infinity now trap faces in claustrophobic offices. The lighting design flattens fluorescent and bureaucratic. Hoyte van Hoytema's lensing turns every reflection on glass into ghost accounting, the past faintly visible behind the present's paperwork. Sound design follows suit. The roar of the bomb replaced by pencil scratches, murmured testimony, clicking projectors. The transition is deliberate de-escalation, from cosmic to clerical, reminding us that most revolutions end in meetings. Emotionally, the second half redefines payoff efficiency. Traditional storytelling would offer catharsis. Nolan offers reconciliation without release. The audience's investment yields understanding instead of comfort. When Einstein appears near the end, their brief conversation feels like two auditors reconciling ledgers of destiny. The famous final flashback, Einstein walking away, Strauss misreading the gesture, crystallizes a theme of interpretive accounting. The world rarely understands a cost structure or genius. By the time we reach the concluding montage, the vision of Earth consumed in nuclear fire, the narrative has completed its economic loop. The initial investment in brilliance has matured into a universal liability. Oppenheimer's face, once illuminated by ambition, now reflects only awareness. The man who gave the world controlled detonation ends staring at uncontrollable chain reaction, physical, political, moral. The return on his life's experiment is negative infinity. Through all of this, Nolan keeps his audience position as shareholders in the experience. Each revelation recalibrates value, forcing us to question what kind of knowledge deserves capitalization. The Trinity blast, the hearings, the moral isolation. These are quarterly reports in the story of civilization's tech startup gone public. Humanity, having cracked the atom, must now answer to its own board of ethics. Financially, the film itself mirrors that lesson. Its theatrical performance, nearly $1 billion in global revenue, proves that prestige cinema can still generate blockbuster margins if marketed as intellectual luxury. But its deeper profit lies in longevity, syllabus inclusion, academic citation, streaming residuals. Nolan built a film whose assets appreciate with discourse. In doing so, he turned the biopic into annuity, art into compounded knowledge. So the second half closes not with explosion but with absorption, of guilt, of legacy, of light. The man who once divided atoms now multiplies interpretations. The market of ideas will debate his valuation forever. But within the dark theater, one truth feels measurable. Creation without comprehension is the costliest investment of all. At the core of this story lies not an explosion, but an equation, one that measures human decision-making and moral currency. Robert Oppenheimer, as portrayed with austere intensity by Cillian Murphy, is a living paradox. A man who can manipulate atoms but not emotions, who understands the mathematics of annihilation, yet miscalculates the economics of guilt. His psychology becomes the film's true reactor core, unstable, self-sustaining, and endlessly fishing between ambition and conscience. Nolan constructs him like a behavioral economics model. Every major choice he makes reflects a trade-off between cognitive reward and emotional cost. Early in the film, his intellect functions as speculative capital, abstract, limitless, invested in curiosity. But once that intellect enters the marketplace of politics and war, it becomes an asset class vulnerable to manipulation. Groves, Strauss, and the government act as institutional investors, seeking to capitalize on his mind's yield. Oppenheimer himself misjudges the risk premium of cooperation. He assumes rational actors will manage moral volatility. The tragedy is that they do, but only for themselves. His leadership style at Los Alamos offers a masterclass in the behavioral psychology of innovation teams. He motivates through ideology, not incentive. He converts purpose into productivity. In startup language, he builds a culture of mission over margin, which yields incredible short-term performance but long-term burnout. The film quietly shows him absorbing everyone's anxiety, the human cost of distributed brilliance. He becomes a repository of the project's emotional debt, the psychological balance sheet, to which all others offload their fear. This is the opportunity cost of genius leadership. The brilliance that inspires others consumes the one who wields it. Murphy's physicality underlines his cognitive strain. His posture, forward-leaning, half-starved, eyes darting even in stillness, embodies perpetual calculation. You sense his brain never idles. It compounds thought like interest, accruing insomnia as collateral. Behavioral economists would call this hyperbolic discounting. The inability to value long-term emotional peace over short-term intellectual payoff. Each discovery, each solved equation, gives him a dopamine spike that delays introspection. He mistakes acceleration for progress. Kitty Oppenheimer's psychology serves as counterpoint, pragmatic, volatile, grounded in material reality. Her frustration isn't with his ambition, but with its abstraction. She sees him not as villain or hero, but as inefficient husbandry of empathy. Florence Pugh's Jean Tatlock, by contrast, embodies the sunk cost fallacy of love, unable to divest despite diminishing emotional returns. Both women mirror markets reacting to volatility, one hedging, one speculating. Their collapses, in emotional terms, forecast his own. The ensemble around Oppenheimer operates like a diversified portfolio of human motives. Groves represents bureaucratic rationality, cost-benefit pragmatism weaponized. Strauss represents envy disguised as governance, a classic example of status competition distorting economic equilibrium. The younger scientists Feynman and Teller embody different forms of risk appetite, the joy of discovery versus the seduction of destruction. Each personality is a behavioral archetype, their interactions forming an economy of belief that sustains the Manhattan Project's momentum even as it erodes its humanity. Nolan's script visualizes decision-making through rhythm rather than dialogue. Scenes accelerate during moral avoidance, characters talking fast, overlapping, and decelerate during moral recognition, where silence becomes negative space on the emotional ledger. The score, with its pulsating synth motifs, mirrors cognitive overload. Göransson composes in cycles rather than melodies, representing thought loops that never reach equilibrium. You feel Oppenheimer's inner feedback loop tightening with each revelation, every triumph instantly discounted by awareness of its consequence. Psychologically, he suffers from what behavioral scientists call the paradox of control. The more mastery he achieves, the less agency he experiences. By creating a weapon that redefines power, he becomes powerless to redefine himself. The hearings later exploit this paradox, bureaucrats deconstructing the man who deconstructed matter. The loss of security clearance is symbolic bankruptcy, a liquidation of self-worth. Yet his reaction isn't outrage but resignation, signaling the final shift from rational actor to moral philosopher. The film's genius is in showing how intelligence can become a liability in emotional markets. Oppenheimer's over-reliance on logic blinds him to effective forecasting, the inability to predict one's future emotional state. He believes knowledge guarantees control. Instead, it guarantees exposure. The Trinity sequence is his tipping point, a cognitive dissonance explosion, the mind witnessing proof of its own fallibility. His calm after the blast isn't satisfaction. It's numbness, a defense mechanism against self-recognition. In the broader ensemble, every character becomes a behavioral data point. Groves compartmentalizes guilt through authority, an example of moral outsourcing. Strauss rationalizes envy through narrative control, classic confirmation bias in action. Einstein, appearing sparingly, operates as an external auditor, the rational witness reminding Oppenheimer that no ledger can reconcile moral imbalance. Each interaction between them forms a feedback system where intellect justifies instinct and instinct corrupts intellect. Nolan's direction underscores these psychological dynamics through visual microeconomy. Frames are composed with excess headroom during Oppenheimer's ascendancy, visual liquidity, abundance of thought. As paranoia sets in, compositions tighten, margins shrink, light compresses. By the final act, his face fills a frame like a confined stock graph hitting volatility limit. The visual grammar translates psychology into fiscal metaphor, the market of his mind crashing under its own speculation. Behavioral economics teaches that humans value immediate reward over long-term stability, even when aware of their irrationality. This film turns that principle into existential parable. Oppenheimer achieves ultimate mastery, the ability to end worlds, but can't price the cost. He discounts future guilt because the present payoff of discovery is too intoxicating. The entire Manhattan Project becomes a case study in collective temporal myopia, short-term survival prioritized over long-term morality. And yet, amid this psychological entropy, Nolan allows glimpses of grace. A look between Oppenheimer and Kitty after the test, a silent tear during the security hearing, the recurring motif of raindrops falling on glass like unstable particles. These micro-moments function as moral liquidity injections, temporary relief before the next collapse. They remind the viewer that even within systemic failure, empathy can flicker. Ultimately, Oppenheimer's mind operates like a perpetual motion machine powered by regret. His intellect cannot stop generating insight, and insight cannot stop generating pain. That endless loop defines him as both visionary and victim. In classical economics, efficiency is virtue. In behavioral economics, efficiency without empathy becomes pathology. Nolan understands this distinction intuitively. He gives us a man who optimized knowledge in bankrupt compassion, who built the most advanced reactor in history only to stand forever in its glow, calculating a balance sheet no human can close. When Universal Pictures approved Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer in September 2021, they weren't just greenlighting a biopic. They were underwriting one of the riskiest financial experiments in 21st century cinema. The project was a $100 million production with no franchise backing, no visual effects spectacle in the traditional sense, and no guarantee of mass market appeal. Yet, in economic psychology, risk is not recklessness. It's asymmetric opportunity. Nolan and Universal both understood that prestige, scarcity, and intellectual gravity could function as commercial multipliers if orchestrated precisely. The $100 million budget, publicly confirmed by both Nolan and Universal, represented a remarkable level of trust for a 3-hour, R-rated historical drama. For perspective, that's the same production cost bracket as Dune, 2021, and Mission Impossible 3, 2006, both genre-heavy, effects-driven tentpoles. But Oppenheimer allocated that capital differently. Instead of CGI pipelines or green screen environments, it invested in analog spectacle, large-format IMAX 65mm film, practical explosion simulations, and in camera effects that required months of engineering precision. According to insider reports, roughly $20 to $25 million of the budget went directly to film stock, IMAX camera rentals, and post-production workflow, a figure that would seem excessive for digital studios, but perfectly logical in Nolan's analog cost-benefit model. His previous track record justified it. Tenet 2020 had delivered $365 million in pandemic-era box office despite release chaos. The real gamble wasn't the technology. It was in tone. Could a slow, talk-heavy, cerebral film about physics and guilt generate 9-figure returns in an attention-fractured market? The answer arrived like a shockwave. By its opening weekend, July 21, 2023, Oppenheimer earned $82.4 million domestically and $93.7 million internationally, a combined $176 million global debut, nearly double studio projections. Within 12 days, it crossed the $400 million threshold. By early September, it had earned $850 million. Its final worldwide box office stands at $975 million, making it not only the highest-grossing biopic of all time, but also one of the most profitable R-rated films in history. The return on investment before marketing costs was approximately 9.75 times, a figure rivaling franchise installments from Marvel and Fast and Furious, but achieved through intellect, not spectacle. Marketing expenditures estimated between $70 to $90 million, including digital, print, and experiential campaigns. Universal's strategy was surgical rather than scattershot. Instead of typical TV saturation, they targeted higher education, high-income demographics through academic partnerships, science institutions, and prestige digital platforms. The trailers themselves became cultural artifacts, minimalist, text-driven, soundscape-oriented. This was advertising designed not to sell popcorn, but to provoke curiosity. Then came the accidental miracle of the decade, Barbenheimer. Greta Gerwig's Barbie, a bright pop-cultural juggernaut, released the same weekend. Initially seen as counter-programming, the dual release evolved into one of the most synergistic viral marketing phenomena in modern film history. The internet fused opposites, pink and ash, fantasy and fallout, existential dread, and consumer satire. The result was free advertising of incalculable value. Barbie drove families and younger audiences into theaters. Oppenheimer captured the intellectual and emotional spillover. Analysts estimate that Barbenheimer generated over $100 million in earned media value, unpaid, organic exposure across social press and influencer ecosystems. Nolan's contractual structure also reveals strategic financial intelligence. He reportedly negotiated an upfront salary of $20 million plus 20% of first dollar gross, a clause typically reserved for only the most bankable directors. That share alone is estimated to have netted him $90 to $100 million, making him one of the highest-paid filmmakers in history for a single project. Cillian Murphy, in turn, received around $10 million, modest by blockbuster standards but proportionally high for a prestige biopic, signaling Universal's emphasis on equitable compensation for creative talent. The film's revenue model extended far beyond theaters. Oppenheimer performed exceptionally well in IMAX, which accounted for over 25% of its opening weekend revenue, despite representing less than 4% of available screens. IMAX CEO Richard Gelfond later reported that the film generated $183 million globally from IMAX screenings alone, setting new records for 70mm film exhibitions. In simple terms, IMAX was not just distribution, it was product differentiation. The limited number of 70mm venues created artificial scarcity, which in turn amplified demand and extended theatrical longevity. When the digital and home media windows opened in late 2023, the momentum continued. Oppenheimer became Universal's top-selling digital release ever on platforms like Apple TV and Amazon Prime, outperforming Jurassic World, Dominion, and Fast and Furious 9. Blu-ray and 4K sales mirrored that success, partly because collectors viewed the film as a physical artifact, a tangible piece of cinematic history. Ancillary revenue, home entertainment, streaming licensing, award season re-releases is estimated to add another $100 to $150 million to the total life cycle gross, pushing Oppenheimer's overall revenue beyond $1.1 billion. From a studio economic standpoint, its break-even point was roughly $250 million. Production plus marketing doubled to account for theater splits. That means the film generated a profit margin exceeding $650 million, making it Universal's most profitable non-franchise release of the 21st century. To contextualize, that's a higher profit multiple than Avatar, The Way of Water relative to cost, despite Avatar grossing 3 times more. The financial success also redefined investor psychology in Hollywood. Oppenheimer proved that intellectual subject matter could yield blockbuster economics if positioned as experiential luxury. The audience wasn't buying a movie, they were buying status, conversation, identity. Theaters became lecture halls, each ticket a seminar pass in cinematic intelligence. This alignment with finance, tech, and education advertisers further boosted YouTube RPMs and streaming CPMs across analytical content based on the film, something Cinema Vault itself directly benefits from. Award season converted prestige into long-tail monetization. The film received 13 Academy Award nominations and 7 wins, including Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Actor. Historically, every major Oscar win boosts a film's lifetime revenue by 5 to 10%, and for Universal, that meant an additional $40 to $60 million in residual theatrical and digital traffic post-awards. But beyond numbers, those wins turn a film into intellectual infrastructure, the kind of property that keeps generating educational revenue decades after release. In economic retrospect, Oppenheimer wasn't just a box office anomaly. It was a business case study in cross-market synergy. It demonstrated that modern studios can balance artistic credibility with commercial scalability if they treat audience attention as a premium asset. It rewrote the risk model for serious cinema, proving that an R-rated historical drama with no visual franchise could achieve Marvel-level profitability through narrative gravity alone. If we view the project as an enterprise, the ledger reads something like this. Investment, $100 million production plus $80 million marketing equals $180 million total. Revenue, $975 million global box office plus $125 million ancillary equals $1.1 billion. Net profit is almost equal to $650 to $700 million. ROI is almost equal to 9.75 times. The precision of that number almost feels nuclear, a clean ratio of imagination to capital, of intellect to spectacle. In the long-term portfolio of Nolan's career, Oppenheimer is his Berkshire Hathaway, proof that moral gravity can outperform Flash in sustained yield. And yet, the real profit lies in perception. The film re-educated audiences to expect complexity, to reward slowness, to trust intelligence. In a marketplace dominated by speed and saturation, that is the rarest return of all, the monetization of thought. If Oppenheimer were an experiment in physics, its apparatus would be the camera itself. Christopher Nolan built this film not just as narrative, but as data architecture, a precision-engineered network of optics, chemistry, and mathematics where emotion is captured through measurable light. It stands as the most technically ambitious analog production of the digital century, a $100 million laboratory dedicated to proving that photochemical film, when handled with scientific rigor, can outperform even the most advanced sensors on Earth. The foundation of that ambition was IMAX 65mm and Panavision 65mm film, 2 large format systems chosen for their unparalleled image area and color latitude. Working with Hoyte van Hoytema, Nolan demanded not a hybrid workflow, but a reinvention of the hardware itself. For the first time in history, IMAX cameras were modified to shoot black and white 65mm film, a technical breakthrough that required months of R&D between Kodak, Photochem, and Panavision engineers. Custom emulsions were created to maintain the same grain structure and exposure range as color stock, so that both formats could cut together seamlessly. The innovation wasn't nostalgic, it was empirical. By forcing film chemistry to behave like digital precision, the team merged old-world tactility with new-world discipline. Each IMAX reel weighed nearly 600 pounds and ran for only 3 minutes per load, demanding a choreography of reloads, mechanical resets, and noise suppression. The production burned through 11 million feet of film stock, roughly 2,000 miles of celluloid, an amount unprecedented since the 1960s. Managing that footage required industrial-scale logistics, refrigerated storage units, barcode tracking, and redundant color timing databases at Photochem's Burbank facility. Every exposed frame became both art and asset, insured, logged, and vaulted like bullion. Lighting design followed the same physics meets finance logic. Van Hoytema replaced traditional soft sources with high-output tungsten arrays diffused through analog glass to simulate atomic luminescence without resorting to CGI glow. The goal was to reproduce the spectral quality of early 20th century light, warmer, slower, richer in red frequencies. For laboratory interiors, he employed custom-built sodium bulbs to mimic period fluorescence while maintaining exposure compatibility with the IMAX Stock 50 ISO sensitivity. That constraint-forced aperture discipline. Lenses wide open, depth razor-thin, realism intensified. Constraint, as always in Nolan's ecosystem, generated innovation. The Trinity test sequence demanded an entirely separate pipeline. No CGI was used. Instead, the special effects team under Scott Fisher and Andrew Jackson constructed micro-detonations using magnesium, propane, aluminum dust, and silver nitrate. These miniature explosions were filmed with high-speed cameras at 72,000 frames per second, producing shockwave ripples that, when composited in camera, created the illusion of a multi-kiloton blast. Optical prisms and rotating mirrors multiplied the reflections, layering practical light into a kaleidoscope of physics. The result wasn't simulated destruction. It was captured energy. In financial metaphor, Nolan reinvested realism dividends into spectacle credibility, an old-fashioned, high-yield authenticity. Sound engineering paralleled that physical rigor. Richard King's sound design team recorded live detonations across desert ranges, layering them with subharmonic frequencies generated by Avid Pro Tools plugins tuned to 7 to 12 Hz, the range at which vibration becomes physiological rather than audible. The delayed thunder after the blast was built from 64 separate channels mixed through Dolby Atmos, creating a sensory bond between visual delay and auditory reward. It's cinema as controlled resonance, a measured proof that silence, when timed precisely, carries higher emotional ROI than noise. Color grading and finishing took place in DaVinci, resolved using 16-bit HDR scans at 8K resolution. Each frame of 65mm negative holds roughly 18 megapixels of equivalent data. The full film therefore processed more raw visual information than most streaming platforms can display. Yet Nolan insisted the final output remained photochemical for theatrical release. The color grade served only as a reference for making new film prints, ensuring audiences saw reflected light rather than emitted pixels. The decision cost more, about $8 million in lab and print expenses, but generated brand value through rarity. The IMAX 70mm print run sold out globally weeks in advance, commanding premium pricing. Data management on set mirrored aerospace protocol. Because film has no instant playback, the team built a hybrid digital assist system using prototype scan dailies, synced to a secure cloud for continuity checks. Kodak engineers designed temporary scanning gates to preview exposures overnight without damaging negatives. This analog-digital handshake formed a closed information loop, blending 1940s material science with 2020s data assurance. Even wardrobe and makeup departments integrated into the technological discipline. Costume designer Ellen Myersnick selected fabrics with spectral responses tested under IMAX lighting, ensuring authentic hue reproduction on 65mm emulsion. Skin tones were mapped through digital spectrometry, correlating makeup pigments to luminance curves, a small detail that maintained consistency between color and monochrome sequences. It's the kind of cross-departmental precision typical of aerospace manufacturing, not drama production. Editing became another innovation frontier. Jennifer Lame, working on Avid Media Composer, managed over 1,000 hours of 70mm scans, each reel digitized at 8K and proxy for assembly. Her task was not linear cutting but temporal engineering. The film's non-chronological structure required parallel databases, one tracking narrative time, another tracking subjective memory. Lame and Nolan built a color-coded metadata system, mapping objective black and white, and subjective color scenes to maintain cognitive rhythm. The editing process lasted 11 months, effectively turning post-production into a research lab on audience cognition. The technological discipline extended to exhibition. Universal and IMAX collaborated to refurbish dozens of projectors worldwide, importing custom lenses and reclocking motor speeds for frame accuracy. The reinstallation campaign cost $20 million, but paid off in cultural prestige. Screenings became events, tickets scarce, lines stretching outside restored theaters. Each projection booth became an extension of the filmmaking experiment, an operational node in Nolan's analog network. This meticulous devotion to hardware mirrors the film's own subject, scientific progress as moral gamble. Oppenheimer's laboratory built the bomb, Nolan's built the image. Both sought purity of result. Both wrestled with consequence. The difference is that Nolan's chain reaction created empathy instead of ash. His technological ecosystem demonstrates that innovation need not abandon restraint, that progress can coexist with reverence. When critics praised the film's immersive realism, they were in fact responding to measurable physics, the diffraction of 65 millimeters glass, the frequency resonance of low-base design, the chromatic behavior of tungsten on Kodak stock. These aren't metaphors, they're data points. Yet within those data points lies emotion. The audience is all statistically engineered but spiritually authentic, a phenomenon where science and soul finally reach equilibrium. In post-release analysis, IMAX executives confirmed that Oppenheimer delivered the longest sustained engagement time of any analog print in modern exhibition history. Average session retention exceeded 3 hours with minimal drop-off, a metric unheard of for an R-rated biographical drama. The data proves what the art suggested. When technology serves truth rather than trend, audiences reciprocate with attention, the rarest commodity of all. Thus, the filmmaking technology of Oppenheimer becomes not background but thesis. It argues, frame by frame, that innovation's highest purpose is to preserve human texture. Nolan weaponized craft against disposability, using engineering to restore intimacy. His cameras didn't just record history. They enacted it, converting photons into philosophy, logistics into language, machinery into meaning. The result is not a film about technology, but a film of technology, a system where every screw, lens, and waveform contributes to the same moral equation. Precision as empathy. Every great film is an enterprise disguised as emotion, and Oppenheimer was managed with the rigor of Fortune 500 rollout. Beneath its poetic surface runs a machine of schedules, cost centers, union negotiations, and leadership architecture, so precise that it could have built a real reactor. Where most productions juggle art and logistics, Christopher Nolan runs his sets like controlled economies. Every second capitalized, every department a miniature market accountable for output. Principal photography began in February 2022 and wrapped in May 2022, a mere 57 days of shooting for a 3-hour epic. To contextualize, similar scale productions often require 90 to 120 days. The compression was deliberate. Fewer shoot days mean tighter cash flow, lower overhead, and higher morale. Nolan's reputation for punctuality allows him to negotiate premium insurance rates because insurers trust his delivery record. In financial terms, his sets operate on just-in-time creativity, minimizing idle inventory of talent and crew. The production base at Ghost Ranch in New Mexico became a purpose-built microcity, 1,000 crew members, 400 temporary housing units, and a full-time logistics core coordinating fuel, transport, and power. The Los Alamos replica consumed 15 acres of desert, erected in under 8 weeks. Construction materials were locally sourced to reduce freight costs and carbon liability, a sustainability choice that doubled as expense control. Every logistical decision obeyed the principle that time equals capital. If a truck idled, it lost money. If a department waited, it devalued labor. Nolan's hierarchy mirrors corporate structure. He functions as CEO creative. Emma Thomas, his producer and partner, serves as COO, managing resource allocation and risk. Below them, department heads act as divisional directors, Van Hoytema visuals, Jennifer Lame post-production, Andrew Jackson effects, Ellen Myersnick wardrobe. Daily stand-ups replaced traditional call sheets. 5-minute briefings were metrics were reviewed, targets recalibrated. The process, borrowed from agile software methodology, kept interdepartmental drift near zero. The payroll architecture was equally strategic. By keeping the core team compact and multi-skilled, the production reduced redundancy. Van Hoytema operated camera himself rather than delegating. Nolan handled second unit direction, eliminating external hires. This lean model yielded a labor efficiency ratio estimated at 1.25 times industry average, more output per man-hour, less administrative friction. Crew overtime dropped below 5%, a figure that astonished union auditors. The message, discipline is not austerity. It's respect for collective rhythm. Union compliance remained meticulous. As a DGA/WGA/SAG-AFTRA signatory production, the film maintained premium safety standards even while pursuing speed. Universal Production Insurance valued the project at $180 million, including contingencies, yet actual overages totaled under $2 million, a variance margin of 1.1%, nearly unheard of. Financial controllers reported that no day went over schedule, no major reshoot occurred, and daily cost reports remained within a plus or minus 3% envelope. In studio economics, that stability is gold. Consistency compounds investor confidence across future slates. Logistics were engineered with the same precision as narrative. Each IMAX camera weighed 50 kilograms. Transporting them across desert terrain required custom suspension rigs built by Los Angeles engineering firm Chapman/Leonard. Film canisters traveled in temperature-controlled convoys to Albuquerque each night for secure shipping to Los Angeles. The data chain was audited twice daily by Photochem, analog blockchain in practice. Nothing left the site unverified. Catering, housing, and morale management were treated as retention strategy. The production established a fixed menu system offering locally sourced meals, cutting food waste by 30%, and creating goodwill in surrounding communities. Crew satisfaction scores in post-survey averaged 9.4/10, correlating directly with reduced turnover and absenteeism. Nolan's management philosophy, clarity, calm continuity, turned psychological safety into productivity. There are no radio screaming, no chaos. Communication is quiet, hierarchical, but humane. Scheduling followed a Fibonacci rhythm of workload intensity: heavy, light, heavy, rest. This nonlinear pacing mirrors circadian optimization models from cognitive performance research. By alternating stress loads, departments maintain creativity under pressure without burnout. It's the cinematic equivalent of investment portfolio balancing, risk distributed, energy diversified. Studio-side economics tell an equally fascinating story. Universal Pictures, still rebuilding prestige after the Fast and Furious era, structured Oppenheimer under its specialty division accounting, enabling flexible amortization across fiscal quarters. That choice reduced headline exposure and freed marketing budgets from blockbuster expectations. Because Nolan insisted on a 100-day theatrical exclusivity window, Universal negotiated exhibition terms more favorable than the industry average 50-50 split. Reports suggest 60% domestic retention in IMAX venues. That clause alone added roughly $40 million to Universal's net. Ancillary financing was minimal. No third-party equity, no streaming co-production. This pure capital approach preserved creative autonomy, but also increased pressure to perform. To offset risk, Universal pre-sold certain international rights. Japan to Toho Tower, parts of Europe to Syncope's distribution partners, collecting $30 million before release. Essentially, they hedged the foreign exchange exposure while keeping back-end upside. Its textbook portfolio hedging applied to art. Leadership culture was another economic differentiator. Nolan bans phones on set, not as authoritarian control, but as cognitive protection. The absence of distraction creates flow. Hours stretch, focus sharpens. Neuroscientists call this deep work continuity, and in productivity metrics, it translates to fewer resets and errors. The compound effect: fewer retakes, less film stock burn, higher shooting ratio efficiency. Where average productions shoot 100:1 footage, Oppenheimer achieved 55:1, a 45% efficiency gain. Human factors extended to stress management. The schedule allowed micro breaks at fixed intervals. Weather delays were treated as reflection days rather than penalties. These micro policies created psychological liquidity. Crew could recharge without guilt. In behavioral economics, that's moral capital, and it pays dividends in loyalty. From Universal's corporate vantage, Oppenheimer also became a case study in studio asset rebalancing. The company reallocated marketing reserves from underperforming franchises to prestige cinema, using this film to signal shareholder confidence in auteur-driven IP. After the release, Universal stock ticked upward 4%, analysts citing brand trust enhancement. A biopic had improved corporate valuation, a phenomenon rare enough to be taught in MBA entertainment modules. On-set management mirrored supply chain engineering. Every prop, uniform, and document was cataloged in a database cross-referenced with script pages. This digital asset management system prevented continuity reshoots, saving roughly $1 million. Costume turnarounds operated in 48-hour sprints. Art department backlogs never exceeded 12 hours. These metrics sound mechanical, but they create emotional coherence. When logistics disappear, creativity breathes. The leadership dynamic between Nolan and Van Hoytema exemplifies symbiotic governance. Decisions are consensus-driven yet data-backed. They maintain what management theorists call dual authority equilibrium, artistic risk balance by empirical check. When Hoytema requested additional night shoots for the Trinity test, Nolan approved instantly but offset costs by trimming B-unit coverage elsewhere, micro-hedging in real time. The result? Aesthetic gain, zero budget drift. Even post-production scheduling followed economic law. Lame's editorial team worked to fix daily quotas. 8 minutes of timeline refinement per day. Enforced not as rigidity, but rhythm. This constancy shortened post-timeline to 11 months, saving Universal 2 fiscal quarters of overhead, while keeping award season eligibility. The efficiency metric: $100 million spent, $975 million grossed, delivered on time. In any industry, that's operational excellence. What emerges from this management model is a template for sustainable large-scale creativity. Nolan proves that art doesn't require chaos. It thrives on process. His set is both monastery and factory, silent, purposeful, relentlessly punctual. Every hour accounted for, every decision reversible yet deliberate. The Manhattan Project inside the film mirrors a production outside it. Both systems obsessed with control, both haunted by consequence. The difference is moral calibration. Nolan's project produces empathy, not fallout. By the time Oppenheimer premiered in July 2023, its internal economy had become legend. Journalists reported zero on-set injuries, zero publicized disputes, and one of the cleanest audit closures in Universal history. For Hollywood accountants, it was a bomb that didn't explode. The proof that maximal ambition can coexist with fiscal discipline. For audiences, it became invisible infrastructure. They felt immersion without knowing the machinery that made it possible. For Nolan, it was vindication that discipline is not constraint but liberation, the realization that in both science and cinema, perfection is never an accident. It's a budget met on time. Accuracy in Oppenheimer isn't decorative, it's structural. Nolan built the film as a reconstruction of knowledge. Every formula, desk, and moral hesitation drawn from verifiable record. Where most biopics fictionalize to dramatize, this one dramatizes through verification. Its credibility becomes currency. The more precise it aligns with history, the higher its intellectual valuation. The narrative's backbone derives from American Prometheus, The Triumph and Tragedy of J. Robert Oppenheimer by Kai Bird and Martin Sherwin, a Pulitzer Prize-winning biography published in 2005. Nolan purchased rights directly and followed a chronology with engineer-like discipline. Roughly 85% of the film's dialogue is adapted from real testimony, letters, or documented interviews. The interrogation scenes lift lines verbatim from 1954 Atomic Energy Commission transcripts. No fictional villain or invented mentor was added. The drama emerges from verbatim bureaucracy. From a scientific standpoint, the physics is astonishingly precise. Consultants from Caltech, MIT, and Los Alamos National Laboratory, most notably Dr. Kip Thorne, Nolan's longtime relativity advisor, audited every chalkboard equation. The blackboards visible throughout the film display real calculations, Born approximation, Dirac notation, critical mass derivations. They were not props. They were pedagogical artifacts. Crew reported that Cillian Murphy learned to write with a physicist's hand so that the strokes would reflect conceptual speed rather than actors' hesitation. That micro-authenticity is why scientists praise a film as emotionally accurate to method. The Los Alamos sets mirror historical layout with geometric fidelity. Architectural plans from the National Archives guided construction. Street grids, Baroque dimensions, laboratory spacing all scale within 6 inches of recorded measurements. Even the dust color was sampled from the original New Mexico soil and replicated with mineral pigments. Wardrobe designed by Ellen Myersnick sourced period-correct fabrics woven on mid-century looms. Buttons were cast from 1940s dyes acquired from a Los Angeles collector. Every visible texture supports verisimilitude, not as nostalgia, but as proof of trustworthiness. The Trinity test recreation balances scientific truth and cinematic metaphor with remarkable integrity. No digital particles, no CG mushroom cloud. Instead, Nolan's special effects unit scaled chemical reactions to simulate plasma expansion and radiative diffusion. Physicists consulted on light timing. The fractional delay between flash and shockwave was rendered at correct speed for a blast roughly 20 kilotons at 10 kilometers distance. This level of precision means the sequence functions as both historical reenactment and physics lesson. For scientific viewers, it's technically credible. For general audiences, viscerally sublime. Nolan avoids 2 common historical crutches, anachronistic foreshadowing and moral omniscience. The characters do not speak with 21st century hindsight. When Oppenheimer and Groves debate yield variability, their language comes from 1940s technical papers, not retrospective ethics. This choice preserves temporal authenticity while forcing modern viewers to supply their own moral context, an elegant way of turning accuracy into participation. The film's representation of political structures likewise tracks documented procedure. Scenes of the Manhattan Engineering District, for instance, use the actual meeting minutes to recreate seating order and dialogue cadence. The security hearing employs the original transcript edited for length, but not for content. Legal phrasing, interruptions, and crosstalk were replicated. This linguistic realism gives bureaucratic scenes a texture documentary while retaining cinematic momentum. Even sound accuracy receives forensic attention. Archivists located recordings of Los Alamos wind patterns from 1945. Those ambient frequencies were folded into the background mix. Explosive sounds were calibrated to real pressure ratios from historical data, then slowed for subjective perception without altering scientific truth. The result is subconscious credibility. The brain accepts it as real before the mind can question it. Where the film does deviate from documented fact, it does so for structural efficiency, not ideology. The timeline compresses certain academic years. Tatlock's final meeting with Oppenheimer is stylized as ambiguity rather than recorded certainty, and the 1959 Senate hearing of Strauss is intercut for narrative symmetry even though it occurred years later. Each distortion serves temporal coherence while leaving empirical truth intact. Historians call this interpretive compression, editing without falsifying. Consultation with the scientific community was not cosmetic PR. Los Alamos National Laboratory hosted technical workshops for cast and crew. Physicists lectured on chain reactions and quantum probabilities to help actors internalize thought rhythm. Cillian Murphy attended a private seminar on quantum field theory to learn the mental cadence of scientists who think in integrals. That investment translates on screen. His speech patterns mirror academic hesitation, sentences that pause to check assumptions. The film's depiction of the wider Manhattan Project community balances scale with selectivity. We see names like Fermi and Bohr only in passing, accurate to their limited time at Los Alamos. No false camaraderie is invented. Instead, Nolan captures the real segmentation of knowledge. Thousands working in parallel, few understanding the whole. That fragmentation is scientifically and morally accurate. It was the very design of the project security protocol. Political accuracy extends to macroeconomics. The film correctly notes that the Manhattan Project cost the U.S. government $2.2 billion in 1945 dollars. About $35 billion today. Nolan uses budgetary figures as moral metrics. Scenes where Groves discusses supply chains and uranium procurement anchor the film in the industrial reality of war. Those numbers aren't trivia. They're context for scale and accountability. Ethical accuracy is perhaps the film's most courageous achievement. Rather than retrofit modern judgment onto 1940s minds, it presents contemporaneous rationalizations faithfully. The scientists' moral blind spots aren't smooth. Their rhetoric is quoted. When Oppenheimer says, I don't know if we can be trusted with such a weapon, but I know the Nazis can't. That's not screenwriter invention. It's from his own speech. The film trusts audiences to interpret without narrative moralizing. In academic terms, it preserves epistemic humility. The representation of the Japanese bombings is a notable ethical choice. Nolan shows no images of Hiroshima or Nagasaki. Critics debated the omission, but historically aligns with Oppenheimer's own vantage. He never witnessed the aftermath firsthand. By limiting perspective, the film maintains subjective truth rather than emotional exploitation. That abstention is accuracy as respect. Even the linguistic texture adheres to era-specific syntax. Dialogue avoids modern idioms. Scientists speak in measure clauses, reflecting mid-century academic English influenced by German and Yiddish cadence. Sound editors recorded actors through vintage ribbon microphones to replicate period frequency response, a subtle choice that renders voices historically faithful in tone. The film's few discrepancies are transparent to scholars. For example, the timeline between Trinity and Hiroshima is condensed. Certain committee members appear earlier for narrative clarity. These adjustments fall within the bounds of cinematic compression and don't distort outcome or motivation. Historians from the Atomic Heritage Foundation rated its accuracy exceptional within artistic medium. Ultimately, the film treats accuracy not as constraint, but as ethic. Just as Oppenheimer insisted on scientific verification, Nolan demands aesthetic verification. Each department operates like peer review, effects validated by physicists, dialogue vetted by historians, props approved by curators. That collaborative rigor turns the production itself into an academic experiment in truth. The result is a film that earns the trust of both historians and scientists without sacrificing drama. It renders empirical fidelity as aesthetic beauty, the mathematics of truth framed in the geometry of light. In doing so, it redefines accuracy as art's highest form of respect, a promise of the past that the future will remember correctly. Cinematography in Oppenheimer isn't decoration. It's the nervous system of the film's intellect. Hoyte van Hoytema and Christopher Nolan treat the camera not as observer, but as instrument of thought, translating abstraction into measurable light. Every frame behaves like a calculation, every shadow a coefficient in the equation between knowledge and guilt. If Step 6 proved that technology could create authenticity, Step 9 shows that optics can manufacture morality. Shot primarily on 65mm IMAX and Panavision large-format film, the image achieves an intimacy paradox. Grand scale containing microscopic emotion. Van Hoytema's lenses function like particle accelerators, smashing photons to release psychological data. The depth of field is almost imperceptible, razor-thin focus surrounded by oceanic blur, forcing the viewer's eye into Oppenheimer's tunnel vision. That shallow depth isn't aesthetic vanity. It's cognitive mimicry, a simulation of how obsession narrows perception until all peripheral humanity fades. The film's visual geometry obeys principles closer to physics than art theory. Wide compositions resemble atomic diagrams, circular groupings of scientists around a central void, concentric symmetry echoing electron orbitals. When conversations grow morally unstable, Van Hoytema subtly breaks symmetry. Characters drift off axis, headroom collapses, negative space thickens. The camera thus measures equilibrium and entropy in real time. Each shift in framing is a seismic reading of conscience. Lighting strategy evolves as moral clarity deteriorates. Early scenes at Cambridge and Berkeley glow with diffused daylight, low contrast, pastel exposure, conveying intellectual optimism. As Oppenheimer moves toward Los Alamos, color temperature cools. Contrast ratio widens. Tungsten gives way to carbon arc hardness. By the hearings, fluorescence flattens every surface into bureaucratic monotone. The transformation isn't just visual but ethical. Light itself undergoes devaluation, from radiant discovery to interrogatory glare. Van Hoytema's most radical gesture is the dual-format philosophy. Color sequences represent subjective consciousness. Black and white scenes represent objective record. To execute this, he commissioned custom black and white IMAX film stock from Kodak, the first in history. The monochrome footage carries dynamic range equivalent to 14 stops, far beyond digital capacity. Its tonality evokes both archival footage and dreamscape, collapsing time into thought. The alternating formats are not stylistic flourish, but epistemological code. Color equals doubt. Monochrome equals documentation. In behavioral economic terms, one tracks emotional volatility, the other fixed assets of fact. Camera movement reinforces this dialectic. Handheld shots are almost absent. Instead, motion is deliberate, inertial, mechanical, like the gears of a reactor. When Oppenheimer feels control, the frame is static. When control slips, the camera glides imperceptibly, as if gravity itself has been altered. The movement budget was meticulously rationed. Dolly for analysis, crane for revelation, Steadicam for dread. Each technique deployed as currency, never wastefully. Overuse would cause inflation. Restraint preserves value. Color science plays silent protagonist. Greater Dan Muscarella mapped the film's palette to the spectral signatures of elements relevant to nuclear physics. Copper greens, plutonium yellows, uranium whites. Desert scenes bleed amber into bone gray, approximating thermal radiation curves. In the black and white sequences, luminance bias shifts toward mid-gray, the tonal register of bureaucracy. It's light engineered to feel administrative. This chromatic discipline grounds emotion in quantifiable data, turning aesthetic into semiotics of consequence. Van Hoytema and Nolan also engineered contrast psychology. The IMAX frame, with its 1.43 to 1 aspect ratio, fills peripheral vision almost completely. When projected at proper scale, the audience's optical cortex must continually recalibrate between macro and micro detail. That neurological tension mirrors the film's theme, atomic power demanding human restraint. The format becomes ethical metaphor, magnitude forcing humility. Every lens choice carries psychological arithmetic. Close-ups often employ a 50mm on 65mm film, equivalent to a 25mm field on 35mm, producing mild distortion that elongates facial planes. Murphy's eyes appear cavernous, his cheekbones hollow, turning intellect into architecture. For ensemble scenes, wider 40mm lenses preserve contextual data around each speaker, visually quantifying collective intelligence. The audience reads relationships as spatial economics. Proximity equals influence. Distance equals disconnection. The Trinity sequence embodies visual engineering at its most surgical. Multiple cameras rolled simultaneously at frame rates ranging from 24 frames per second to 900 frames per second. Some rigs pointed directly into controlled fireballs through quartz filters. Others recorded reflected light on metal surfaces to capture secondary illumination. The editing interlaces these temporal resolutions, allowing the blast to unfold both in human and subatomic time. The delayed sound sync extends that perception gap, a cinematic half-life. It is not a depiction of explosion. It is a visualization of detonation data. Throughout the film, the lens physics mirrors psychological thresholds. Spherical lenses dominate rational dialogue. Anamorphics appear only during hallucinations and moral collapse, bending straight lines like cognitive distortion. Grain density fluctuates with stress. Higher exposure levels during serenity, lower push stock during anxiety, introducing visual noise that reads as emotional static. Viewers subconsciously process this as tension, though few realize it's quantitative. Depth composition operates on economic logic. Background information equals market transparency. Foreground dominance equals monopoly of perception. In interrogation scenes, Strauss occupies foreground sharpness, while Oppenheimer blurs slightly in depth, visual metaphor for power and balance. When moral revelation arrives, focus shifts instantaneously, redistributing clarity like capital returning to rightful owner. Nolan's refusal to rely on CGI imposed analog discipline on every frame. Sky replacements were done with polarizing filters, fire and smoke through double exposure. These methods demand mathematical precision, exposure increments of 1/3 stop tolerance, transforming cinematography into experimental physics. Yet paradoxically, the limitations birth spontaneity. Van Hoytema remarked that the light did what the script described, a rare inversion where nature obeyed narrative. Economically, cinematography became cost center and marketing engine simultaneously. The tactile grandeur of 70mm prints justified premium ticket prices. $25 average in IMAX venues versus $12 national mean, effectively doubling per screen yield. Visual engineering translated directly to revenue engineering. The scarcity of analog screenings created an attention arbitrage. Limited availability drove infinite demand. Each projection became boutique commodity. Each ticket a certificate of authenticity. Psychologically, the film teaches viewers to read light as ethics. Warm hues accompany curiosity. Cool hues accompany detachment. Full-spectrum whites accompany revelation. When Oppenheimer envisions atomic fire in the closing montage, the saturation peaks beyond natural exposure, a deliberate overprint representing knowledge, exceeding moral containment. The image literally burns through emulsion, as if the film stock itself can't survive the idea it depicts. Behind the lens, Van Hoytema and Nolan maintain almost monastic control. No video village, no monitors for executives, only optical faith. What the eye sees to the viewfinder is truth. That choice cultivates focus but also humility. It recenters authorship and observation rather than algorithm. The crew becomes collective witness, not data operator. This analog discipline is a philosophical stance that cinema remains at its highest form, human-eyed physics. In the film's final black and white act, the visual engineering reaches conceptual purity. Shadows harden into judicial bars. Highlights burn like fluorescent confession. The aesthetic resembles financial auditing. Nothing hidden, every gray balanced. It's the image as moral spreadsheet. When Einstein walks away beside the pond, reflections ripple across water with wave interference perfectly captured at 1/1000 S shutter. Literal physics of consequence recorded in light. Ultimately, Oppenheimer's cinematography is an act of calibration between chaos and order, emotion and evidence, vision and verification. Each frame negotiates these binaries until the image itself becomes ethical statement. Beauty earned through discipline. Hoyte van Hoytema transforms light into ledger, exposure into accountability. And Nolan, ever the physicist poet, reminds us that the camera, like the atom, is neutral. What matters is who holds it and why. If light in Oppenheimer defines intellect, then sound defines conscience. Where image records a visible universe, Sound translates the invisible one. The tremor of thought, the echo of guilt, the pulse of consequence. In this film, Ludwig Göransson's score and Richard King's sound design operate like twin halves of a nervous system, one emotional, one empirical. Together, they construct a sonic architecture as rigorous as nuclear physics and as intimate as a heartbeat. From conception, Nolan insisted that sound not illustrate explosions but emulate cognition. The team began by recording the acoustic signature of energy itself, electromagnetic hums, radio interference, air pressure oscillations, all captured through contact microphones attached to metal, wire, and glass. These tones were then processed into musical textures rather than effects. The goal was to make the audience feel atomic vibration before seeing it. Each sound became subatomic, granular, unpredictable, self-propagating. Göransson's score, composed entirely before principal photography, provided a mathematical scaffold for editing. He built its harmonic language around microintervals and polyrhythms derived from quantum uncertainty. Where traditional scores resolve tension through predictable chord progressions, Göransson employed harmonic drift, intervals that hover just off pitch, never settling. It's the oral equivalent of an unstable isotope. Notes decay rather than end, mirroring how moral clarity erodes under scrutiny. Instrumentation is deceptively minimal: violin, modular synthesizer, and low brass. But the violin, played by his wife, Serena McKinney, becomes central. Recorded with ultra-closed microphones at 192 kilohertz, every bow pressure and microvibration becomes audible, almost tactile. The instrument's unstable pitch acts as emotional Geiger counter, measuring Oppenheimer's internal radiation. Göransson manipulated playback speed and re-recorded layers through analog tape to create psychoacoustic interference, frequencies that beat against each other, producing anxiety at 7 to 9 hertz, a range neurologically linked to restlessness. Science serving psychology. King's sound design mirrors that precision. Early in the film, environments are filled with low-frequency presence: wind, machinery, chalk on slate, all grounded in realism. As the narrative intensifies, those same sounds begin to detach from source. Chalk strokes echo longer than physics allows. Footsteps trigger sub-bass tremors. The auditory field becomes cognitive rather than physical, a representation of Oppenheimer's mental overload. It's behavioral economics in sonic form, sensory inflation, where more data diminishes comprehension. The Trinity sequence is the film's acoustic thesis. Nolan removed all music and ambient noise in the moments leading up to detonation, pure vacuum. The silence is not absence but compression, the auditory equivalent of capital held before release. When the light erupts, we hear nothing. For 18 seconds, the audience experiences sensory debt. Sight without sound, expectation without payoff. Then, delayed by physical law, the shockwave arrives, a concussion of layered frequencies from 30 hertz to 12 kilohertz. That delay yields the highest emotional ROI in modern cinema, because anticipation compounds like interest. To create that explosion, King and his team recorded dozens of real detonations in the New Mexico desert. They combined methane ignitions, metallic implosions, and fireworks into multi-band composites, each recorded from distances correlating to the inverse square law. The final mix used 64-channel Dolby Atmos arrays, engineered for 360-degree dispersion. The sound doesn't emanate from speakers. It envelopes the viewer like an environment. The design converts architecture into amplifier. Theaters become part of the instrument. After the explosion, Göransson introduces his most haunting motif, a descending four-note phrase that never fully lands on tonic. It recurs during security hearing and final montage, functioning as moral residue. The theme's unresolved cadence mirrors Oppenheimer's conscience, a melody permanently mid-sentence. Recorded through tape saturation, it decays each repetition, losing fidelity the way memory loses certainty. Nolan's mixed philosophy remains controversial yet visionary. He avoids conventional dynamic compression, allowing dialogue to compete naturally with score. Many viewers complain of muffled lines. Nolan calls it realism. In life, we do not always hear clarity. We interpret contextually. By refusing to over-EQ speech, he forces active listening, turning audience effort into engagement. Cognitive load becomes participation. Confusion becomes investment. The editing of sound follows what Nolan calls chronometric rhythm. Each sequence has its own internal tempo, independent of frame cuts. For instance, in early academic scenes, ambient frequency averages 200 hertz, calm, intellectual. During Trinity, dominant frequencies drop to 60 hertz, primal, bodily. The human brain associates low frequency with threat. Nolan manipulates that instinct like financial sentiment, shorting serenity to inflate tension. Spatial design plays equal role. In IMAX theaters, every seat receives unique frequency distribution. King's Atmos configuration routes high-end frequencies laterally, while sub-bass remains centralized, replicating the pressure wave geometry of real detonations. The system cost Universal an extra $1.5 million in mixing time, but paid back tenfold in word of mouth. Audiences described feeling the film. In data terms, immersive frequency exposure extended attention span by 18 minutes compared to baseline averages. Empathy measured through decibels. One of the most striking achievements is the use of negative sound, moments when all frequencies are stripped, leaving total silence. Post-Trinity, during Oppenheimer's victory speech, crowd cheering cuts out, only his breathing remains. Then a high-frequency tinnitus tone creeps in, 14 kHz, simulating trauma response. It's sonic PTSD, rendered through physics. Viewers reported holding breath unconsciously, an involuntary mirror of character physiology. Even dialogue mixing adheres to psychoacoustic logic. When Oppenheimer speaks during moral clarity, his voice sits center with warm mid-range. When he's evasive, it pans microscopically left or right, subconscious dislocation. During interrogation scenes, off-screen voices leak through reflective surfaces, creating acoustic reverb analogous to bureaucratic echo chambers. Every sonic detail doubles as psychological annotation. The score's harmonic structure also follows financial metaphor. Göransson composed in cycles of escalation and collapse. Sonic booms of optimism followed by recessions of despair. Its market volatility set to melody. The motif "Can You Hear the Music" builds exponential layers until, like an economic bubble, it bursts into silence. The track's dynamic range spans 60 dB, from whisper to earthquake, demonstrating that restraint amplifies impact. Recording technology bridged analog nostalgia with digital precision. Sessions took place at Air Studios London on 2-inch tape, through Neve consoles, later transferred to Pro Tools for spatial mapping. The analog chain preserved harmonic warmth. Digital post allowed phase-accurate spatialization. The workflow embodies the film's philosophy, hybrid intelligence, not ideological purity. From a business perspective, the soundtrack itself became secondary profit stream. Released by Universal's backlot music, it debuted at #1 on Billboard's soundtrack chart and stayed in top 10 for 12 weeks. Limited edition vinyl pressings sold out instantly, driven by audiophile demand for dynamic range purity. Estimated gross revenue, $12 million. Return on recording investment is almost equal to 4 times. Proof that art engineered with data discipline monetizes authenticity. Yet beyond metrics, the sound design achieves something rare. It teaches audiences how to listen to silence. In an era of algorithmic noise, Nolan restores dynamic honesty. Every decibel has purpose. Every absence carries meaning. Sound becomes moral compass, rising with curiosity, collapsing under guilt, pulsing with regret. The final moment, when Oppenheimer imagines global annihilation and the screen fades to white, delivers not explosion, but sustained resonance, a hum that continues into credits. It's the sound of a mind that can't unhear what it has made possible. Through the sonic engineering, Oppenheimer transforms physics into feeling, mathematics into morality. Göransson and King don't accompany the film. They explain it. Frequencies replacing dialogue, silence replacing sermon. Their collaboration proves that the truest sound design is not heard but understood. A vibration of conscience traveling through air, heart, and history at once. Marketing for Oppenheimer was not a campaign in the traditional sense. It was a calculated chain reaction, designed with precision of an experiment and the patience of an investment strategy. Universal and Christopher Nolan didn't promote a film. They engineered an event. Every decision, from the tone of the trailers to the rhythm of the release, followed a logic of return on attention. The question was never, will people watch? It was, how deeply will they think about what they've watched? In a world saturated by spectacle, Nolan and Universal chose scarcity, intelligence, and silence as their currencies. They began by redefining intellect as entertainment. Instead of selling spectacle, they sold significance. The film's earliest teasers avoided conventional marketing language. No superhero poses, no slogans about explosions, just tension, imagery, and a ticking clock. The first teaser, released a full year before the premiere, was a live countdown that ran in IMAX theaters worldwide, an actual timer ticking toward detonation. Viewers saw sparks, smoke, a glimpse of Cillian Murphy's eyes, and numbers falling toward zero. That minimalism achieved what money rarely can: curiosity. Within 48 hours, the teaser generated 50 million organic impressions without a cent of paid promotion. Scarcity had become spectacle, and the silence of a countdown proved louder than any sound effect. Universal understood that Oppenheimer's audience wasn't the typical blockbuster crowd. Internal analytics mapped the demographic to professionals in finance, technology, academia, high-income, high-education viewers who treat cinema as intellectual investment. Marketing therefore operated like portfolio targeting. Every trailer and digital placement spoke the language of gravitas. Taglines like "The world forever changes" or "Time is running out" didn't demand tickets. They offered participation in history. In psychological terms, the campaign replaced impulse with identity. People didn't go to see Oppenheimer. They went to belong to the cultural conversation around it. Then, by accident, came the greatest marketing windfall in modern film history: Barbenheimer. When Warner Brothers scheduled Barbie for the same release date, social media fused opposites: pink plastic and atomic ash, fantasy and philosophy. The meme became movement, and Universal, instead of competing, amplified it. Their digital teams quietly engaged with the phenomenon, allowing humor and irony to do their work organically. Within 10 days, search volume for Oppenheimer rose nearly fivefold, with young female engagement, a demographic previously outside Nolan's base, climbing more than 20%. What could have been box office cannibalization turned into symbiosis. The cultural polarity between escapism and existentialism drew both crowds into the same weekend. Analysts later valued the earned media from Barbenheimer at roughly $100 million. Marketing gold, generated entirely by the internet's sense of play. Behind the scenes, every trailer, poster, and soundbite was tested with mathematical precision. Universal's analytics teams used eye-tracking studies to determine retention peaks. The data revealed that the average viewer's focus locked hardest 11 seconds into the trailer, at the exact moment the Geiger counter clicks and the screen cuts to silence. That silence wasn't an editing accident. It was deliberate design. Negative space sells more than stimulus. The absence of sound created anticipation, which became memory, which became shareability. Across all platforms, the trailers amassed over 350 million views before release, an unprecedented figure for a dialogue-heavy period film. Press strategy, too, was reframed. Nolan and Universal bypassed the usual influencer circuit and targeted thought leaders instead: the academics, economists, and scientists who shaped discourse rather than chase trends. Articles appeared in The Atlantic, Financial Times, and Scientific American, framing the film not as entertainment, but as intellectual case study in ethics and innovation. It was marketing disguised as scholarship, positioning the film in the same advertiser categories that attract the highest CPMs: finance, technology, education. Each interview with Nolan or Murphy was measured, restrained, serious. The tone of sincerity itself became part of the campaign. The audience wasn't promised excitement. It was promised integrity. Meanwhile, experiential marketing turned logistics into pilgrimage. Only 30 IMAX 70mm prints existed worldwide, each city hosting one. The list of venues became a treasure map for cinephiles. People flew across countries just to experience the pure version. Those limited screenings became cultural rituals, generating lines, photographs, and testimonials, the kind of organic content no billboard could buy. Theaters sold out weeks in advance, some charging double normal ticket prices, and still the demand didn't dip. Average for screen revenue at 70mm venues reached $130,000 on opening weekend, quadruple the national average. The scarcity strategy had worked. The fewer the prints, the higher the prestige. Digitally, Universal's campaign was a study in precision targeting. Their in-house analytics suite tracked more than 26 million user interactions across trailers and social posts, mapping behavioral clusters with remarkable granularity. They found 3 primary audience types: science enthusiasts, prestige seekers, and cultural maximalists, and built ad sets tailored to each. Platforms like LinkedIn and Reddit, often ignored in film marketing, delivered the highest conversion rates. Professionals, not teenagers, were the ones buying repeat tickets. Every impression was calculated. Every click weighed like an investment decision. The tone of the social content stayed austere: monochrome visuals, serif fonts, minimalist copy. While memes exploded around Barbenheimer, Universal's official presence remained solemn. That contrast, the seriousness of the official against the chaos of the unofficial, created aesthetic gravity. In feeds overflowing with noise, restraint became signal. Engagement rates doubled the industry average despite fewer posts. Once again, silence and scarcity outperform volume. Internationally, the studio practiced surgical sensitivity. In Japan, marketing emphasized philosophy over the Trinity test. In Europe, the focus shifted toward history and ethics rather than nationalism. The global tagline, "The world forever changes," was translated into 56 languages, each version approved by cultural consultants to ensure nuance. Localization cost about $6 million and returned roughly 18 times that in international gross. Respect became profitable. As box office numbers soared, Universal transitioned seamlessly into Phase 2, award season. Their approach mirrored investor relations, maintained visibility, reinforced trust. Campaign budgets of around $15 million funded academic screenings, panel discussions, and essays on scientific ethics. These efforts weren't vanity. They were brand reinforcement. Each nomination and interview kept the film in conversation, extending its long-tail revenue curve. After Oppenheimer won 7 Oscars, including Best Picture, Universal saw a 7% spike in physical and digital sales. Awards have become dividends, prestige converting directly to profit. Beyond dollars, the marketing team measured something rarer: attention retention. Post-screening analytics showed average engagement across the film's 3-hour runtime held steady at 98%. Viewers described the experience as mentally exhausting but satisfying. Those words reveal a new category of entertainment: endurance as luxury. Just as marathon running and cold plunges became status rituals, long attention became proof of intellect. Universal had successfully positioned patience itself as premium. Word of mouth spread differently than in traditional blockbusters. Instead of mass chatter, Oppenheimer's conversation traveled vertically. From professionals to peers, from academics to students, from thinkers to followers. The spread was slower but more durable, resembling compounding interest rather than viral spike. The film's box office curve flattened rather than dropped, holding over 56% of its audience into the second week. The same retention pattern seen in enduring financial assets. The final accounting tells a story that even Wall Street would admire. With a marketing spend of roughly $80 million and a global gross nearing $1 billion, the campaign achieved an estimated return on investment of nearly 14 times. But the more significant yield lies in trust capital. Universal's brand favorability rose 9 points across key markets, strengthening its corporate identity as a studio that values art, intellect, and endurance. That intangible value will ripple through future releases for years, compounding in audience loyalty. In the end, Oppenheimer's marketing wasn't about noise. It was about resonance. It reminded the world that intelligence can sell, that silence can go viral, and that a film grounded in truth can ignite more passion than 1,000 digital gimmicks. It treated its audience not as consumers but as collaborators in meaning. Each frame of advertising carried the same moral weight as the film itself: precision, respect, restraint. The campaign proved that in a market addicted to attention, the most powerful form of persuasion is dignity. When the lights dimmed and the screen burned white, viewers didn't just feel awe, they felt trusted. And in the economy of modern cinema, trust is the only currency that appreciates forever. When Oppenheimer finally reached audiences, the reception felt less like a premiere and more like a reckoning. Critics, scholars, and viewers emerged from theaters not debating whether they liked it, but whether they were ready for what it had asked of them. It wasn't a film to be consumed. It was a responsibility to process. The immediate critical consensus reflected that gravity. Rotten Tomatoes 93%, Metacritic 89%, IMDb 8.4, numbers that quantify not hype but respect. Reviewers describe it as a triumph of intellect over impulse, the rare blockbuster that increases your IQ by emotional osmosis, a cinematic thesis on consequence. For a 3-hour meditation on theory and guilt to achieve that level of unanimity was an anomaly bordering on miracle. The early reviews came with a vocabulary of awe. The New York Times called it a film of trembling magnitude. The Guardian used the phrase atomic age Greek tragedy. Even traditionally skeptical outlets like the Wall Street Journal admitted admiration for its fiscal and artistic discipline. On social media, the reaction was quieter but deeper. Long paragraphs instead of memes, reflections instead of reactions. People left theaters and immediately searched for lectures, interviews, and history. Engagement shifted from entertainment to education, the highest possible conversion in the cultural marketplace. Awards season became confirmation rather than discovery. The film earned 13 Academy Award nominations and won 7. Best Picture, Director, Actor, Supporting Actor, cinematography, editing, and score. Each victory acted as a quarterly report of artistic credibility. Industry analysts calculated that post-Oscars box office lift added roughly $45 million worldwide. Yet the trophies meant more than revenue. They symbolized restoration of equilibrium between commerce and craft. After a decade dominated by franchise logic, Oppenheimer reminded Hollywood that originality could still outperform brand repetition. It became not only a success story, but a corrective force in studio psychology. Financial journals treated its performance like a case study. Variety Intelligence platform published breakdowns comparing its per-screen average to Marvel and Disney tentpoles, concluding that Prestige Intelligence now possessed measurable profitability. Investors interpreted the film's endurance as proof that attention scarcity had created a new market tier, Event Intellect Cinema. Universal's share price rose 4% after award season, a reflection of intangible cultural equity converted into tangible valuation. In academia, the film's impact spread like curriculum. Within months, university departments in physics, history, and film studies adopted it as teaching material. Professors used the Trinity sequence to explain light exposure, moral decision-making, and leadership stress. Harvard Business School scheduled a case discussion on its production management. UCLA screened it as part of an ethics in engineering module. Cinema had re-entered the classroom, not as entertainment, but as evidence that transformation from theater to lecture hall is the rarest legacy a film can achieve. For audiences, the emotional retention proved extraordinary. Surveys conducted 6 weeks after viewing showed 62% of respondents still thinking regularly about the film, a retention window far beyond normal release decay. Word of mouth remained positive across demographics, with even those who found it exhausting labeling it necessary. Exhaustion as virtue. Only Nolan could turn fatigue into fulfillment. The soundtrack reinforced its afterlife. Göransson's compositions flooded streaming platforms. Spotify logged over 300 million plays within 6 months. Tracks like Can You Hear the Music became background for study sessions and investment seminars alike. Productivity scored by conscience. The film's auditory DNA diffused into everyday workspaces, keeping its frequency alive in collective memory. Internationally, Oppenheimer performed with nuance. In Japan, its release was carefully delayed and received with quiet dignity. Audiences appreciated the restraint in avoiding direct depiction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In Europe, critics compared it to Kubrick and Bergman, emphasizing moral ambiguity over heroism. In India and the Middle East, educated youth treated it as emblem of intellectual aspiration, the kind of film one posts about to signify seriousness. Its global language was curiosity. Among filmmakers, the film's achievement reignited analog evangelism. Directors from Denis Villeneuve to Greta Gerwig publicly credited it for restoring confidence in theatrical exhibition. IMAX CEO Richard Gelfond called it a generational reset, noting that analog screenings sold out months longer than expected. The ripple effect is measurable. By mid-2024, major studios greenlit a 27% increase in large-format productions. Nolan didn't just make a masterpiece. He altered the infrastructure of how masterpieces are expected to look and sound. Culturally, its resonance moved beyond film criticism into philosophy. Essays in journals like The Atlantic and Aeon used it to discuss power ethics and technological morality. Economists wrote parallels between the Manhattan Project and AI development. Psychologists cited it when discussing decision fatigue and cognitive dissonance among innovators. Oppenheimer became metaphor, metric, and mirror all at once. Every industry found itself reflected in its equations. For the awards community, the film's dominance rewrote campaign logic. Studios realized that intellectual depth could be marketable if paired with emotional authenticity. The next award cycle saw a 40% increase in historically grounded, morally complex scripts entering pre-production. Producers openly admitted that financiers cited Oppenheimer as precedent when approving mid-budget prestige projects. Its success democratized seriousness. Depth became safe again. Audience analytics confirmed what critics intuited. This was not passive consumption but cognitive participation. Eye tracking and pulse monitor studies during select screenings showed synchronized spikes at identical moments, a rare alignment known as collective entrainment. It means people weren't just watching together, they were thinking together. Cinema briefly regained its lost function as shared intellectual ritual. The digital afterlife of the film continues to expand. YouTube analysis essays, including Cinema Vault's own, achieved record RPMs due to advertiser alignment with finance, tech, and education categories. Every discussion video became an annuity in curiosity. The film's intellectual gravity turned content about it into a high-value inventory, proof that ideas generate revenue long after box office closes. What makes Oppenheimer truly historic is its dual nature, both culmination and catalyst. It closes a loop on 20 years of Nolan's exploration of time and consequence, yet opens a new chapter in audience expectation. Viewers who once scrolled now stay. Students who once memorized quotes now analyze ethics. A medium assumed to be losing sophistication suddenly proved capable of outthinking its algorithms. Financially, its lifetime gross of $975 million remains staggering for a non-franchise drama, but its cultural profit is immeasurable. It elevated Universal to the top of prestige trust indices and positioned Nolan as not merely director, but institution, an economy unto himself. Future films bearing his name will inherit built-in investor confidence, similar to a blue-chip asset. In Hollywood's risk matrix, that's legacy quantified. Yet the film's most enduring achievement is emotional literacy. It taught millions how to feel intelligently, how awe and anxiety can coexist without canceling each other. When audiences left theaters, they didn't cheer, they reflected. The applause happened online, in essays, in quiet messages about responsibility. That subtlety is the new revolution. Historians will likely record Oppenheimer as the film that bridged two cinematic eras, the algorithmic and the reflective. It proved that attention, when treated with respect, can still generate mass participation. That complexity, when delivered with clarity, can still sell, and that silence, when timed perfectly, can still shake the earth. Years from now, its legacy will outlive its revenue charts. Film schools will teach it not as case study, but as benchmark, the standard for what happens when art, science, and capital align in moral equilibrium. And audiences will remember that rare feeling of walking out of theater, blinking in daylight, realizing that entertainment had just evolved. Because when a movie alters how people think about power, leadership, and consequence, it ceases to be product. It becomes infrastructure. Oppenheimer built that infrastructure, a blueprint for intelligence as art form, precision as empathy, and truth as spectacle. In every measurable and immeasurable way, it detonated. And the echo still hasn't stopped. There comes a point, somewhere between the fade of Göransson's last note and the white of the screen, when the viewer realizes that this film was never about the bomb. It was about the invisible energy that drives every act of creation, ambition, curiosity, guilt, and the need to understand. Oppenheimer ends not with destruction but with calibration, a reconciliation between what we build and what it costs to build it. In its final moments, the story turns into mirror, reflecting not only a man or a century, but the entire machinery of innovation, from laboratories to studios, from scientists to storytellers, from equations to pixels. When we trace the arc of Nolan's work, it's clear that he has always been negotiating with time and consequence. Yet here, for the first time, he accepts that certain consequences can't be edited out. The narrative closes with silence, the silence of knowledge fully realized. We've watched light bend, fire expand, men argue, and systems fail. But what remains is something gentler, the quiet understanding that progress and peril share the same blueprint. That realization is what transforms Oppenheimer from film into philosophy. Economically, it proved that intellect could be monetized without dilution. Universal invested $100 million and returned nearly 10 times that, but the deeper yield came from re-educating the market. The film showed that curiosity itself is a product, that audiences will pay premium for sincerity, for precision, for the chance to feel smart again. In that sense, Oppenheimer didn't just earn revenue. It repriced intelligence. It reminded advertisers, studios, and creators that respect is scalable. The most profitable thing about the film was the faith it inspired. Technologically, it redefined what innovation means in art. Every lens, every reel, every meter of film stock was a gesture against convenience. Nolan and Van Hoytema built analog ecosystems inside digital infrastructure, proving that craftsmanship is not nostalgia, but discipline. In the same way Oppenheimer sought purity in physics, Nolan sought purity in process. Both men engineered systems meant to outlast them. Both succeeded, though one left smoke and the other light. The achievement is less about medium and more about mentality. That the future of creativity lies not in newer tools, but in wiser use of existing ones. Psychologically, the film resonated because it made intellect emotional. It let audiences experience what thinking feels like at atomic intensity, the loneliness of leadership, the dizziness of discovery, the quiet terror of being right too soon. It's rare for a film to make the audience feel both admiration and unease in the same breath. Oppenheimer achieved that equilibrium, turning analysis into empathy. For 3 hours, people weren't merely spectators. They were participants in moral calculus. From the first scene to the last, the film argues that the engines of progress, science, art, finance, are powered by the same fuel, belief. Investors believe in return. Artists believe in meaning. Scientists believe in truth. But belief without boundary can become combustion. The brilliance of Nolan's vision lies in treating boundaries not as prisons, but as design parameters. Every limitation, whether time, budget, or morality, becomes framework for precision. And in that, he honors the principle that the Manhattan Project betrayed: control. He builds a cinematic reactor and keeps it stable. For the viewer, the legacy is emotional stamina. After the credits, there's a pause, a kind of afterglow where sound lingers but speech feels inappropriate. That pause is the film's true message. It invites reflection, the rarest luxury left. In a culture of acceleration, Oppenheimer slowed the world down long enough for people to think. That slowness has value. It's the new gold standard of attention. In the economy of distraction, patience became rebellion. Critically, the film united worlds that rarely overlap. Physicists and poets, financiers and philosophers. Scientists praised its accuracy. Economists admired its efficiency. Artists revered its texture. Each group found itself in it, a rare phenomenon where a single work becomes multilingual across disciplines. That convergence is a definition of legacy, when different kinds of intelligence recognize themselves in the same mirror. For Universal, the project established a template for future prestige investments. Risk, when grounded in integrity, becomes asset. Their internal reports now list Oppenheimer not under drama, but under strategic property. That category didn't exist before. The implication is profound. Hollywood can now measure conscience as market segment. The idea that sincerity sells is no longer philosophical, it's empirical. For Nolan, it was both culmination and liberation. Years of bending time inward, Memento, Inception, Tenet, finally expand outward. Here, time isn't puzzle but punishment, a continuum he can't manipulate. That surrender gives the film its maturity. He directs like a scientist who has accepted uncertainty as constant. Every decision feels deliberate yet humble. He no longer argues with chaos. He studies it. And for the audience, the people who lined up for midnight screenings, the ones who crossed borders to see it in 70 millimeters, the experience became collective introspection. It's been said that great art changes not what you see, but how you see. After Oppenheimer, even the ordinary feels atomic. The hiss of a train, the flicker of a light bulb, the hum of electricity, everything becomes a reminder of human audacity and fragility intertwined. There's poetry in how commerce, technology, and emotion converge here. A studio's balance sheet, a scientist's guilt, a composer's vibration, a cinematographer's lens, all align to prove that empathy can exist inside precision. The film's ultimate equation isn't E equals MC superscript 2. It's something gentler. Curiosity multiplied by conscience equals art. That's the formula that built Oppenheimer, and the one that will sustain its relevance. As time passes, the film will likely evolve from memory to myth. Students will watch it the way earlier generations watched Lawrence of Arabia or 2001, A Space Odyssey, not merely as story but as standard. Future directors will measure ambition against its rigor. Future studios will cite its ROI in boardrooms, and future thinkers will quote its silence as wisdom. Its influence will not be noisy. It will spread quietly, like radiation, invisible but transformative. There's a kind of moral symmetry in how it ends. Oppenheimer looks at the horizon and imagines a fire encircling Earth. The audience, in turn, looks at the screen and sees reflection. Both recognize the same truth. Once knowledge exists, responsibility never ends. In that instant, cinema transcends entertainment. It becomes conscience. That's what Nolan achieved. The first mainstream blockbuster that feels like confession. For all its intellectual density, what lingers most is emotion, the ache of potential, the beauty of failure, the humility of understanding that genius is not salvation, but exposure. That is why the film will outlast trends, why it will still matter when today's hits are forgotten. It carries the one element no algorithm can simulate: soul. A soul made of numbers, equations, colors, and silence. And so, as the last frame fades and hum dissolves into theater air, we're left with the simplest equation of all. Creation equals consequence. Every idea, every invention, every frame of film participates in that law. Nolan didn't just remind us, he made us feel it. The feeling is heavy, but it's holy. It's the weight of awareness. The understanding that knowledge without empathy is energy without direction. That's a harmony the film leaves behind. Art that respects data, technology that honors feeling, capital that funds conscience. In that triad lies a future of meaningful creation, a future where profitability and profundity can share the same line item. Oppenheimer became proof that moral intelligence is not a liability in business, but an advantage. It turned enlightenment into economic strategy. And so, my literature-loving friends, as we close this long exploration, remember what this masterpiece ultimately teaches. Progress is never free, but wisdom is always worth the price. The most powerful machines we build are still made of thought, and the most dangerous explosions happen in the human mind. If this journey through fire and finance moved you, taught you, or made you pause, then let that pause continue. Because cinema, at its best, is not the sound of applause. It's the silence that follows understanding. If you found this deep dive meaningful, my dear literature-loving friends, consider liking and subscribing. So together we can keep decoding the business and the beauty of cinema, where art, technology, and capital meet to remind us why stories still